Going into this season, the Mets were supposed to be one of the biggest contenders in the league, and a lot of people even predicted they'd overthrow the Braves and finish first in the NL East. Well, the Mets currently sit fourth in the standings for the NL East, which is surprising due to the great season they had last year and all the money spent this offseason. Obviously, the Mets did lose a few players like Jacob deGrom in free agency and Edwin Diaz after his freak entry in the World Baseball Classic, but they've also had many great additions like Justin Verlander, Jose Quintana, and Kodai Senga. They also extended players like Edwin Diaz and Brandon Nimmo. With all these huge deals, the Mets looked like one of the biggest World Series contenders for the 2023 season. So what happened? This season, the Mets offense has looked solid on paper. Francisco Alvarez is having a great rookie season, Pete Alonso is one of the best home run hitters in the league, Lindor's been great, and Tommy Pham has come out of nowhere to have a great season. On the other hand, guys like Jeff McNeil, Brett Beatty, and Starling Marte have all underperformed with the bats for the Mets. I honestly even give Marte a pass. I don't think AWOL was really thinking he'd do too much, but he still steals bases, and he's a good veteran presence. But then you have guys like Jeff McNeil who had really high expectations but have still been really underwhelming. In general, the Mets offense has just underperformed. They're in the bottom half of the league in team offense at about every stat. At the All-Star break, their team OPS is 715, ranking them in the bottom 10 in team OPS, and the biggest killer is the team's slugging percentage at 398. The Mets as a team basically have the same slugging percentage as J.P. Crawford, who's by no means a power hitter. The difference between the Mets and Crawford though is that J.P. Crawford gets on base a lot, while the Mets are slightly below average at even this. The Mets are also dead last in team at bats, meaning they're going through the lineup quicker, not getting as many hits, and not having as many rallies. The Mets have a lot of big names in their starting lineup, but are still heavily underperforming. But what might be even more frustrating is their pitching. The Mets rotation looks scary this offseason. They invested heavily in their rotation the past 2 years, spending over $80 million on Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander alone. But then if you throw in Kodai Senga and Jose Quintana, that's another $41 million this season. $121 million is more than many teams' payrolls. With this money being spent, they should have the best rotation in baseball, right? Verlander, who was the big signing this offseason, had been out over a month to start the season, and proved that the risk of injury that fans were concerned about had some merit. On the mound, he's been good, but not worth $43 million. He's been a lot better closer to the All-Star break, but still a super risky investment. In general, the Mets definitely jumped the gun on signing him for so much, but if he can stay hot like he's been towards the All-Star break, I think the contract is much more defendable, especially with the veteran presence he can give. Scherzer's also been disappointing on the mound this season. While not being outright bad, he has a below average ERA plus and FIP, while also having his second highest WHIP in the last decade, his highest being 2020. It's hard to scrutinize Scherzer or Verlander because they're both older veterans who are still pitching well, but it's just giving them $40 million, especially when they're high injury risks, is really questionable, and I get why Mets fans are kind of mad about that. Then again, Steve Cohen doesn't seem to care about the money, just the product on the field. But even he's got to realize it's an issue when your two aces are barely above league average, and some may argue a little worse than that just depending on the game. Kodai Senga's had ups and downs throughout the season. Overall, it's hard to complain about his contract. He's actually pitching pretty well. As for Quintana, he just pitched his first game a few days ago after being out the whole season, so that contract's also an issue for the Mets. In total, the whole pitching staff for the Mets ranks 19th in the MLB with a .436 ERA and .135 WHIP. The bullpen has been below average, with David Robertson being a bright spot after losing Edwin Diaz, but after that you got a 37-year-old Adam Ottavino and Brooks Raley trying to hold down the pen. But is there more to it than just stats? What else could be affecting the Mets? Just a few years ago, the Mets were far from contending. The Wilpons owned the Mets at the time and weren't doing much to actually help them win. The Mets continued to struggle, but there was a light around the corner. In 2020, Steve Cohen bought about 95% control from the Mets from the Wilpons, and within a few months, a lot more money started being spent by the front office. On March 31st, 2021, Cohen extended Francisco Lindor for 10 years, $341 million. I would say this is the moment where something changed for the Mets. Their owner was spending money and actually willing to spend big. Here's the thing about Steve Cohen. He's not just some ordinary owner trying to flex his team. He's a genuine Mets fan. He wants his team to win, and more importantly, he'll actually spend. Mets fans had big hopes for the team this season because they got 101 wins in 2022 and look even better on paper after the huge signings Cohen made this offseason. Justin Verlander, Brandon Nimmo, Jose Quintana, Edwin Diaz, Kodai Senga, and Omar Narvaez were all signed or re-signed this offseason. Let's not forget he's also paying Max Scherzer $40 million a year and Lindor $34 million a year. These 8 players were all signed within the last 2 years under Cohen, so it makes sense why Mets fans love him so much. he's willing to spend, and you can find a lot of articles saying that Steve Cohen is actually paving the way for owners to spend more. And they're right. He's doing something great for baseball, but why isn't it working out the way we thought it would? Well, spending a lot of money and almost trying to buy championships doesn't really work. Let's take a look at the Rays. They've been the best team in baseball most of the 2023 season. They're 27th in payroll in the MLB, yet have developed amazing pitching and have a great offense. The Rays' total payroll this season is $74,537,681. Scherzer and Verlander alone are making more money on the Mets than every single player on the Rays combined, yet the Rays are the better team. The Rays have great coaching and actually develop their players. It's why guys like Jose Siri go from being a bench player on the Astros to a great center fielder for the Rays. The Mets have taken the approach of signing players who are already great, but because of this they don't have a young core. In general, the Mets have heavily jumped the gun on a lot of these signings, and it feels like they're just trying to throw money at people and hope it works. It feels as if the Mets are worried about the short term but not long term. The Rays, Rangers, and Braves are all the best teams in the league right now, and all have an identity being a young and fun team that have developed a core and then signed a few big names to go with it. When it comes to the Mets, they're a much older feeling team and have actually funneled a lot of money into older players, which seems to be the opposite of what the most successful teams in the league are doing. Scherzer, Verlander, Marte, Quintana, McNeil, Narvaez, and a few other signings are all older players that are at least 31. If you take out McNeil and Narvaez, they're all 34 or older. Around these ages, injury risk typically goes up while performance goes down. I get a lot of these contracts are not very long term, but at this point it feels like the Mets are spending heavily on older players who will be gone by the time their young core is ready to be called up. The age issue might also be affecting the Mets' culture. A lot of young, fun teams have a great culture that evidently affects how they play on the field. You could see it at the beginning of the season with the Rays or with the Braves in June. At the moment, the Mets are going through a lot of changes with many players coming and going. This can be hard for a team because having team leaders step up can be really important to the dynamic of a team. And it's hard to have leaders like that when the turnover is so high for the team. Brandon Nimmo is the longest tenured Met, who's played for the team since 2016. There are other position players like Jeff McNeil and Pete Alonso who've played for the Mets a while, but it seems like it's hard to have a lot of team chemistry when many of your players haven't gotten the chance to play with the team for a while. As I said earlier about the Rays, Rangers, and Braves, they're all young and played with each other for a long time and will continue to do so. But with the Mets, there doesn't seem to be much of a culture, which is possibly one of the biggest downsides of bringing in a lot of new players instead of developing them. This is probably not the biggest factor for the Mets, but it's definitely something to consider. The Mets really need to figure it out because they've given themselves a really small window to win the next few years. Hopefully they focus on longer deals with younger players like they did with Lindor, and this could give them the chance to have a long window so when seasons like this do happen it won't hurt as bad.